All right. So in this unit, we're going to be studying a few different topics related to living things and how they function, how they change over time. So what we're going to start by talking about the characteristics of life. What living things do, how we know something's alive. And we'll talk a little bit about how living things change over time, about evolution, natural selection. So here I have some pictures of various living things. Got a famous scientist here. It's not Santa Claus. I didn't know who it is. I'd be very impressed if you did. Charles Darwin. That's Charles Darwin. We'll talk about him towards the end of the unit. Giant sequoia. This is a living organism, a single-celled protist called amoeba. We'll look at them in a future unit. Living whale, giraffe, and finches. Got some terms here, some vocabulary. We'll be referring to these words as we move along in our unit. All right. So, we have some stuff here, some pictures. Got a rock, a tree, a light bulb, a caterpillar, a flower, a horse, a cat, a ring, spider, snowman, shell, a beetle, drop of water, a mushroom, a fish. So are these things living or non-living? Well, some are living, some are non-living. Okay, some have characteristics of living things, some do not. What about the rock? No, not living.
Can it talk?
No. Yeah. Can it talk? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Is talking a characteristic of all living things?
No.
A palm tree?
Yes.
Trees alive?
Yes.
Plants are alive?
Yes.
Okay. Sure. What about the light bulb?
Yeah, I didn't know.
No, not alive, but it does have certain characteristics that we're going to be talking about of living things. Like it does use energy, like other living things, but does it have all of the characteristics of life? Oops, sorry. Caterpillar?
Yes.
Flower?
Yes.
Yeah. How about this horse?
Yes.
Why is this horse the same size as a cat? I don't know.
It's a baby.
Maybe. The cat?
Yes. Yes.
A ring?
No.
This giant spider that's the same size as a cat and horse?
Yes.
How about this snowman?
No.
No, although it does respond to its environment. In what way? What? Well, not alive. And so when the temperature outside changes, does it change?
Yes.
Yeah. How about this ladybug?
Yes.
How about a seashell?
No.
How about an oyster?
No. Yes.
A clam?
Yes.
So is this a living,
Yeah.
it's actually a scallop.
That's a scallop? Yeah.
So if it were just the shell, not alive. If it's the entire organism, then it is alive. How about this drop of water?
Yeah. No.
Is big one? Yes, you take it close. Okay. You got it towards it back there. All right. Mushroom?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
Snowman.
Snowman is a no. Sorry. We're very sad about that. The mushroom.
Is the raindrop yes or no?
I don't know. Is it yes or no?
No. Yeah, no. A raindrop.
Why yes, Sophia?
Because, like, a raindrop is falling. No, not just because it's falling from the sky.
Okay.
It's alive because, like, I don't know how to word it, but, like, I don't know. I don't know how to word it.
Although you're very convincing, I'm going to say, why no?
It's not. Cold-blooded or warm-blooded?
Neither is a mushroom.
Or
Or a tree. Faith?
Or a rock. It doesn't reproduce.
Okay. Doesn't reproduce. Lily?
So, it doesn't breathe.
It doesn't, but neither does mushroom.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. It breathes in the carbon dioxide, right?
No.
No.
All right. And how about the fish?
Yeah.
All right. So let's focus on. All right. So what are the actual characteristics of living things? There are lots of different randomish ideas. So all living things have certain characteristics. Every living thing has these 6 characteristics. Any question, Lily?
Oh no.
I'm going to go over them. So first off, they are made of cells. At least one, often more than one cell. So living organisms are made of cells. Living things also must use energy in some way. They consume energy. We call that nutrition. Living things grow over time and often develop and change. They respond to their environment. Their environment changes, they can respond to those changes in some way. They are capable of reproduction to continue the species. And finally, they are adapted to the environment they live in. So these are what we call the characteristics of living things. They're made of cells. They contain and use energy. They grow and develop. They respond to their environment. They are capable of reproducing, and they are adapted to their environment. So let's talk about these various characteristics in a little bit more detail. So first off, cells. What is a cell? Do you guys study cells in elementary school at all? No? Some yes? A couple yeses. Faith, you did?
I did this.
Just two? Oh, good. All right, so what is a cell when we say that? Do you know? Excuse me? No, like cellular data, no, like a cell phone. Cell means sort of a little enclosure, kind of. Yeah, you're getting there. Tiny living building blocks of organisms, of living things. We call cells the basic unit of life. Because the smallest living things are made of a single cell. Anything smaller than that, and it's not a living organism. They're mostly very, very tiny and microscopic, meaning you cannot usually see an individual cell without a microscope. Too tiny. An organism can be single cell, or it could be many cells. We call it unicellular and multicellular. Do you know when I use this word organism, what does that mean? Organism. Where do we use a lot? Do you know what it means?
Kind of like a small living thing.
Not just small, but any living thing. So one living thing, we call that an organism. Nutrition. Again, living things need to get energy somewhere, nutrients. All organisms that are alive need energy. They can get that energy in many different ways. They all need energy. And we call this process of taking foods that we eat, for example, and then extracting the energy out of them, call that metabolism. And it involves several steps. The first one is ingestion. What does that mean? Ingestion. Hold on? Yeah. To ingest something. If I ingest this bite of apple. Lily?
Literally when you put something in your body.
Yeah, it means to take in food, to eat. That's what ingestion means. So the next period, you're going to eat some macho nachos.
Ooh, yeah, that's good.
You're going to ingest some nachos and meat substance and cheese and so forth. Okay, you're ingesting it. So after you ingest some of these macho nachos, they go into your stomach and intestines, and then what happens there? Babe?
Your body breaks down the food?
Yeah, we call that process digestion. So you're going to get energy out of those macho nachos to your cells, but do like little chunks of tortilla chips float through your blood to your brain to give you energy? A little bit of meat is floating through your bloodstream and globs of cheese? No, because the foods that we ingest are broken down chemically into very, very simple molecules. Things like sugars, amino acids, fatty acids. That's what happens to our foods, broken down into simple forms. That happens in our stomach, it happens in our small intestine. So we get ingestion and digestion to break that food. Now then these tiny little particles get into our bloodstream. They float all throughout our body, going to our various cells. And when they get to our cells, these nutrients can help provide them with energy. This happens through a process we call respiration. It's taking these little molecules and getting the energy out, releasing that energy so that we can actually use it to do things, to walk around, to stay alive, to blink, to wring your nose. So we extract the energy from our foods through this process of respiration. And then finally, all of these processes produce some waste. Okay? And these wastes have to be removed from our body, otherwise they become toxic, they become poisonous. So the removal of these wastes is called excretion. Removal of waste. So, living things need to acquire nutrients through nutrition. All right. We then have stimulus and response. That living things respond to changes in their environment. We call these changes stimulus or stimuli. So a change in your environment is a stimulus. living things can respond to a stimulus. Okay, they react to this change. For example, if you move a light to one side of a plant, it reacts to that stimulus by growing towards it. Okay, if a ball comes flying at your face, that's a stimulus. Your reaction would be to duck, maybe to catch it. Okay, stimulus and response. Okay, if you hear a loud noise, that's a stimulus. And the response to the stimulus, your body responds by doing what? Yelling, jumping. How does your heart, what happens to your heart rate? Starts beating faster. Somebody really scares you, your stomach feels weird because you release adrenaline from your adrenal glands into your bloodstream. Okay. Those are responses to a stimulus. Living things grow and develop over time. Oh yeah, your response was to jump. They're watching me now. All right, growth. When we talk about an organism growing, we're talking about an increase in size. So living things start from a little tiny baby to a young adult. That's growth, an increase in size. A tree goes from a tiny seed into a seedling, into a sapling, into a full-grown tree eventually. Even single-celled organisms go from being a smaller single cell to a larger cell. So living things can grow. Living things also are capable of reproduction. Reproduction, what does it mean to reproduce? To reproduce. Lily? To make more of that type of organism. To produce new members of the species. When we're talking about reproduction in living organisms, we have two categories of reproduction. There is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. And this is nothing. We have a whole unit about human reproduction, so if you think this is bad, wait till you get there. So, many types of organisms can reproduce both sexually and asexually. Some can do both. Some can only reproduce in one of these means. And the differences in terms of whether or not there is the combining of genes, genetic information, DNA, from two different organisms to produce the offspring. In sexual reproduction, there are two parent organisms involved. And they combine DNA, chromosomes, genes, to produce the offspring. Animals can reproduce sexually, but so can other organisms. Some single-celled organisms, plants, reproduce sexually. And so when you have this combining of genes from two different parents, the offspring are not identical to either parent. They have a mixture of traits, a mixture of characteristics from each parent. We call that variation. There's variety. Sexual reproduction results in a variety of traits. We know that children are not identical to either parent. They have a mixture of characteristics and traits from each parent. But there are some organisms which also reproduce asexually. Asexual reproduction only involves a single parent organism that basically just sort of copies itself. but it doesn't result in any variation. The offspring are identical to the parent. You know, so if like I had a tomato plant in my garden that produced great tomatoes, I could take a little snip off of one of those stems, and I could plant that in the soil, and it would grow into its own tomato plant. But it's going to be an exact copy. It's identical, because there's only one parent organism, one tomato plant that produced that new plant. That's a form of asexual reproduction. But plants also reproduce sexually. Okay? Pollen is a reproductive cell. Okay? And their flowers have male and female reproductive organs in them. That's what flowers are. They're the reproductive organs of plants. And pollen from one plant fertilizes an egg cell from another plant, and they exchange genetic information. Now, reproduction is not necessary for an individual to survive or be alive, right? So, when we talk about it as a characteristic of life, it is necessary, though, for a species to remain alive. For a whole species to survive, reproduction needs to happen. Otherwise, eventually, all members of that species die out, and the species becomes extinct. And then finally, our last characteristic of life, adaptation. Living organisms are adapted to their environment. Here you have a beaver.
I thought that was a hippo. That was a snail.
That's
I
a
thought
beaver.
that was a chipmunk.
So a beaver has certain traits, certain characteristics that allow it to be successful, to survive, to live in its environment. Such as what? What characteristic does a beaver have that allows it to be successful? Okay?
Its tail.
What about it?
Or its teeth.
Let's go with its tail. What about its tail?
Like, it's like really strong.
Okay, strong, it's flat.
And you can like take a mud and pack.
Can use that tail to pack down mud, to make its lodge, to make its home, to make its dam. So yeah, that's a characteristic it has that allows it to be successful. What else does it have? Really?
Teeth that like chop down wood.
Yeah, it has sharp incisors that it uses to cut down trees, to build its home, and for food as well. It has waterproof fur, so it has various characteristics that help it survive, that help it to be successful in its environment. And all organisms are adapted to certain conditions, have traits that allow them to survive. Here we have an interesting creature,
Where is it? Oh, it's a
just made up.
dragon.
Hold on. So, tell me an adaptation that this creature has and how that might be helpful for its survival. Faith?
It's got sharp teeth.
Sharp teeth. How might that be helpful for its survival?
To eat.
To eat, to capture prey. What else?
It has wings.
What would that be helpful for?
So we can fly away.
From,
Predators.
okay, to escape predators. Brennan?
And it has a shell. Oh.
Which would be helpful to protect it. Yeah, these are all examples of adaptations this organism has that may allow it to be successful. So these are what we call our characteristics of life. When we go back and think about that list we had, those pictures, so is a mushroom alive? Well, does it grow? Yes. Can it reproduce? Yes. Does it make cells? Yes. Does it need energy? Yes. Okay. Is it adapted to its environment? Yes. It has all of these characteristics that we just talked about. Living organisms have all of these characteristics. You can fill in the rest if you want. You don't have to. Any other questions? All right. So all our notes for today. Continue on tomorrow. See you later.